Translated from the Afrikaans word for apartness, the apartheid established in South Africa in 1948 was regarded as a fearsome state apparatus which institutionalized racist segregation and white supremacy. Appearing as a 20th century monolith that could not be vanquished, this regime preserved the Afrikaans' national identity and protected their economic privileges and social advancements, whilst extending the racist state and subjecting the coloured citizens to a lifestyle of oppression and subordination. Justified as a God-ordained order, this racist disparity was embraced by the white minority as a necessity to ensure domination and national power. However, one must ask, if this institutionalized racist regime was so strong and provided substantial benefits to the white population, why was it vetoed against in the 1992 apartheid referendum and eventually abolished in 1994? This article examines the significant role that external and internal economic embargoes and social forces had on influencing and changing the ideology of racism and white supremacy in South Africa. Whilst there are many other factors that contributed to the eventual end of the apartheid, it is clear that the economic embargoes, the sport sanctions, media presence, and social forces enforced locally and internationally place a considerable amount of ideological pressure on South Africa and aided in the prioritizing and involvement of race values. When one examines the main factors that influenced South Africa's racist values and apartheid state, one must take into account that it was the worsening economy, exacerbated by international and national economic sanctions, that saw the government and overall society into a position whereby they had to reevaluate their priorities and negotiate their racist values in order to obtain financial stability. In the mid-1960s, South Africa's economy was striking. Its investments were booming, the utilization of black labour allowed for a high revenue, and its wide list of trade partners ensured that international economic deals and sales were occurring successfully. Residing in such a strong financial state, South Africa was empowered to the point that it resisted or ignored any criticisms of its domestic policies, utilizing the strengths of the economy to support their apartheid ideologies and deny any opposition. However, as the time progressed and several power nations, such as the United States, began to move away from racist ideologies and legislations, it soon became apparent to global business investors and companies that South Africa and their apartheid state was not evolving in their ideologies along with the majority of the globe, instead becoming more defiant and asserting their white supremacy throughout the nation. In retaliation to the unjust legislations, many countries, banks, and international businesses decided to adopt strong economic sanctions, including the restriction of trade, the refusal of South African goods and services, and the withdrawal of investments in shares, in order to pressure the nation into changing their racist ways. Starting in the late 1970s, it became apparent that these international economic embargoes had a large influence over the economy and financial stability of South Africa. As reported by Schwartzman and Taylor, the South African economy was highly dependent on foreign investments and capital inflow. Thus, when international businesses and shareholders withdrew their investments, and banks refused to roll over or handle the nation's external or internal loans, this action effectively plunged South Africa into an economic struggle, the external debt balancing to around $24 billion by the mid-1980s, and their national dollar inflating drastically to the point where even the South African elites suffered financially. From a powerhouse economy to one riddled with debt and inflation, it was through this financial disturbance that citizens within South Africa began to re-evaluate their priorities and demand for political reform in regards to the apartheid state. Understanding that their financial struggles were derived from the government's racist legislations, this experience influenced South Africans to prioritize their racist ideologies and compare the value of white supremacy to a stable economy in which they could sustain their financial status, the latter being the prioritized option for men. According to the head of the South African Reserve Bank, Mr. De Link, the solution solution to South Africa's dire economic state was abundantly clear, stating that economic recovery required political changes that would appease overseas critics sufficiently for capital to start flowing back. However, whilst it was clear to many that the apartheid and its racist values were an anachronism which prevented financial stability, the government held its non-compliant position and merely modified sections of the apartheid law in 1986, an action which unappeased the international economic forces and resulted in the further ban of imported goods such as iron, steel, gold coins, coal, diamonds, uranium, textiles, and agricultural goods. Through this exacerbated restriction of goods and services, further discontent from the apartheid regime spread amongst supporters and paved way for further re-evaluation of racist values in comparison to economic stability. The local plea for the abolishment of apartheid, placing considerable amounts of pressure, of national and international pressure on the government, until the regime was changed in 1994 and the economic sanctions were finally lifted. Therefore, it is clear that the economic cracks in the monolith incurred by the international sanctions and embargoes significantly influenced the values of South Africans and allowed evolution to occur in the form of an abolished apartheid. In a similar manner, it is evident that sporting sanctions pose as another social and economic force that places immense amounts of ideological pressure upon South Africa. According to Corrigan, sporting within South Africa was a very important ordeal. Not only did it highlight the nation's power and skill, but it also, the very notion of sport was considered as an act of superiority against the black citizens. According to the apartheid laws, people of colour were not permitted to take part of or interact with any major sporting leagues or competitions, despite their level of skill or knowledge, as it indicated that the level of skill within a black person could rival and overcome white citizenry, which was contradicting the white supremacy ideologies held within South Africa if they competed. For decades, this ruling was upheld and endorsed. However, in the 1980s, as black consciousness became an international theme and countries began to advocate for equal racial rights, South Africa remained unyielding in their apartheid state, their public reputation and view changing dramatically at their unwillingness to change. Appalled by their strong racist ideologies, international powers such as the United States and the United Kingdom began to enforce economic sanctions as well as sporting sanctions in order to induct ideological pressure upon the nation. Referred to as the international isolation, the sporting boycotts established in the 1980s entailed the refusal of South Africa in any major sporting events or competitions until they abided by the demands of the other countries, in this context, altering their apartheid legislations. Through this boycott, South Africa was officially pardoned from the Olympic Games, the South African National Olympic Committee being banished from the International Olympic Committee, and other significant sporting competitions, including all international tours of rugby, tennis, cricket, and golf. This was a significant sanction, as it not only isolated South Africa within the sporting community, but created a negative reputation of surrounding the country. Through their absence within the Olympics and their refusal to participate in any major sporting leagues, this indicated that the nation was not within a healthy political or social standing, and instead was in a state of political and social unrest, a factor which led to a dramatic drop in tourism, which was only exacerbated by the lack of international sporting competitions arriving in South Africa. Occurring at the same time as several economic embargoes, this dramatic drop in tourism due to the sporting sanctions was detrimental to the already weakened economy and was the last straw for many apartheid supporters. One apartheid supporter who strongly advocated for the 1992 exit referendum stated, "We have to think of our economy, sport, and the rest of it. I can't see any other way. We must go forward now." This indicates that both sporting and economic forces paved way for people within South Africa to re-evaluate their current values. Through recognizing that sport and the economy are important factors within society, many citizens were placed under pressure to reconsider their ideologies and accept that that political change needed to occur in order to move forward as a nation. Through ideological pressure and influencing the nation's reputation, sporting boycotts enabled this change to occur in both the apartheid legislation and the racial values of Afrikaners. When considering the other social forces that affected South Africa and their racist ideologies, one must also consider the role that the media and Hollywood had on influencing global ideological pressure through the release of the classic blockbuster Lethal Weapon 2. Appearing in cinemas as a sequel in 1989, this movie follows two American police officers and their comedic action-filled adventures against the movie's main antagonists, white South African government officials who will hide behind diplomatic immunity in order to commit erratic and dangerous crimes. With the initial release occurring when anti-apartheid movements and international embargoes were at their highest, this portrayal of South Africans as the movie's antagonists were a clever and decisive manipulation by Hollywood to place further ideological pressure upon the nation to change their racist policies. Through portraying South Africans, specifically the white government officials, as the antagonists, the media were able to enforce a negative reputation around the country through associating it with negative actions such as drug smuggling and murder, a factor which further influenced the tourism rates, and also blatantly ridiculed its racist ideologies and emphasized on the notion that change needed to occur. This can mainly be seen within the movie when one of the main characters, Roger Murtaugh, a black police officer, tells a South African immigrant officer that he wants to visit South Africa.
I think there must be some mistake. Sir, listen to your friend here. She knows what he's talking about. I don't think you really want to go to South Africa. Why not? Because you're black. You are. He is.
Of course I'm black. That's why I want to go to South Africa.
You're black.
The officer, clearly taken aback, thus persuaded Murtaugh that it was not wise to visit South Africa at all, and when questioned why, he simply replied, "Because you're black." Then, as the scene changes, it shows that the main protagonists are ridiculing the officer and his reasoning, indicating implicitly that the racist policy of apartheid is ridiculous, and that white supremacy is almost laughable, especially when the white antagonists are completely dominated by the black police officer throughout the movie. In fact, according to A.J. Venter, it is through the utilization of a black police officer in Lethal Weapon, portrayed by Danny Glover, that the media was able to influence South Africa and their changing values. To portray him as an intelligent, wise family man who follows the law and is seen as an equal by his white male partner, Danny Glover extinguished many racial stereotypes that surrounded black citizens within South Africa and made the apartheid appealing to the white minority. Within the former President F.W. de Klerk's autobiography, Danny Glover and his role within Lethal Weapon 2 is specifically credited for challenging the racist values of the white minority and influencing a change in perspective to one that supported the reforms and negotiations that eventually ended the apartheid. Through emphasizing on the flaws within South Africa's government and portraying a new side of black citizens, the media was able to enforce ideological pressure upon the nation to recognize their racial discrimination and influence them to reconsider their racist values. Therefore, although several other economic and social forces contributed to the end of apartheid as well, it must be acknowledged that Lethal Weapon 2 was a significant media force that influenced further ideological pressure on South Africa's racist values and challenged its citizens to reconsider their knowledge of the black race and their worth. Finally, local social forces such as social protests, rallies, boycotts and strikes saw the public value of race change in South Africa and placed the government into a position whereby they had to abolish the legislation of apartheid. According to Dalton and Jutler, social movements have repeatedly acted as a force for social and political change. Although social strikes for black equality and the abolishment of apartheid had been occurring since the early 1960s, it was not until the mid-1980s that general strikes and social movements became one of great organisation and community. According to Schwartzman and Mayer, social unrest had become increasingly heightened as resistance organisations began to emerge. Many universities developing protest organisations to advocate for black consciousness and rebel against the ideology of racism and white supremacy, along with the other power nations. However, it really wasn't until the late 1980s, when the effects of the external economic embargoes and social forces became apparent, that the social movements became a monumental influence in changing South Africa's racial ideologies. Across the nation, social workers, students, religious leaders, and business executives emerged in resistance to the apartheid regime, creating conferences and seminars that offered alternative democratic welfare systems and protest systems, boycotting discriminatory businesses and government resources, and initiating strikes, protests, and marches across the nation. According to Mayers, it was through these social movements and their strong anti-apartheid policies and anti-apartheid arguments that several academic and social leaders from across the nation began to question the apartheid policies, some re-evaluating their racist ideologies and beliefs that the legislation upheld, and becoming very active in the move for social and political reform. One former apartheid supporter, upon reflection, stated that, "I have realized as a white South African, there's a choice to be made about which side you're on, whether you continue to bury your head and continue to enjoy the privileges of being white, or whether you take the step against injustice." This indicated that these social protests not only advocated for change within the government, placing an increasing amount of pressure, but also paved a way for South African citizens to re-evaluate their privileges and evolve within their racist views. Through strongly advocating for racial rights and values, these movements influenced South Africa's public view on race, the majority of the white Afrikaners accepting people of race as a factor of moving forward within a dire economy and social unrest, and placed pressure on the government to initiate political reform in order to avoid mass bloodshed and further upheaval amongst both black and white citizens. Therefore, it must be acknowledged that in corroboration with other forces, social movements and protests such as these allowed South Africa itself to place pressure on its government and reevaluate its own public values of race in order to move forward as a whole nation. In summary, it is clear that whilst other factors contributed towards the eventual end of apartheid, economic embargoes, sporting sanctions, the media and social forces played significant roles in challenging the Afrikaners' racial values and influencing ideological pressure upon the South African government and society. Although racism has not been abolished completely, and many Afrikaners still contain racist ideologies that support the apartheid legislations today, it must be acknowledged that due to this ideological pressure that these forces brought, the apartheid was abolished from the law in 1994, allowing for the nation's black citizens to not only be liberated from the shackles that bound them, but for public racism and white supremacy to almost disappear and allow a new generation of South Africans who only know of a free, publicly equal